Man, I gotta tell you, I feel like an old fossil at this point. I really do, because we've waited like, what, 2 years for some new Resident Evil information. Granted, it wasn't a long wait, it wasn't the worst wait in the world. We were definitely eating with Remake 4. But now we have the newest entry, the newest sequel to Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8, which is Resident Evil 9 Requiem. And I am super excited for this. I am super pumped, and I'm going to discuss a little bit about what we've seen. So the general synopsis for the most part is that we're playing as an FBI profiler named Grace Ashcroft. This name, this last name at least, should not come as a shock to Outbreak fans, or maybe it will, because we finally get some Outbreak representation up in the building after so many years. It's been so long. And we have the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft. Now for the fate of Alyssa Ashcroft, she's dead. All right, she's dead as fuck. And they're setting up this new story where she was murdered at the Wrenwood Hotel 8 years ago, and you see flashbacks of the character with her signature red jacket in that hotel. What I think they're gonna do with that particular segment is they're gonna make that playable somewhat like the Resident Evil 7 tapes, where you can go in and you can play a flashback sequence where you're the cameraman or you're the character and you see the fate of said character as they die. I remember it was a guy that was burned alive. I forget his name. It's been so long. Was it Clancy? I think it was Clancy, but he was burned alive in a trap by the Bakers, and you got to experience like some of the stuff they put him through. And maybe you'll see that with Alyssa, or maybe other Outbreak characters as well, and how they will expand that, of course. But Grace is trying to find out what is happening, what is going down with the murder of her mother. It seemed like she suppressed it a little bit, which is why the FBI director there, Nathan Dempsey, he's saying it's time to sort of go back and relive your past, because you're the only one good enough, capable enough to handle this case. And I like where this is going so far. It kind of reminds me of Resident Evil 7 in a way, not actual 7, but like Resident Evil cross with 7, where 7 was this like hard-boiled detective story and whatnot, and they're sort of doing that here. But the main attraction that we saw in this trailer was obviously RPD is still here in a sense. We're going back to the ruination of the city with the after effects of the thermobaric bomb, and we're going to revisit this as a location. Now this kind of reminds me a little bit of how Metal Gear Solid 4 did the whole we're going back to Shadow Moses, and now Resident Evil is having their moment of going back to something so iconic in the first place, and seeing the town in absolute ruin and whatnot. And that was just a nice little image of showing the RPD just having the roof blown off, the inside statue female maiden having her head just like blown off in the process. This city was absolutely fucked. We're going back to ground zero, and that's going to highlight some particular memories here. They're seeing what's still standing and what new or old creatures will lie in the wreckage. What Capcom has said is this is a bold shift in tone and gameplay. Now, they're going to have a demo sometime around August for Gamescom, and that's going to be the sort of make or break for seeing that bold shift in tone and gameplay. And I just want it to be relative to these detective elements that they're trying to squeeze in. There's going to be high stakes with a cinematic story. Obviously, I guess that means they're going to be a little bit more unorthodox in the way they handle plots, and maybe some characters will be harmed or infected or twists and turns. You know what that means. Intense action, survival horror. One thing they didn't list here is that it's going to be a psychological horror in a sense, which, oh man, this is one thing that the series has experimented with, toyed with when it came to RE7 and to an extent Village as well, because we had the baby that was fucking with our minds and shit, and we were like hallucinating and we didn't know what was going on. So I would imagine some of the best elements taken from those games, which is what Capcom said in the press junket, that the team is taking their experience from the previous RE games and working on this one, and I assume more of the psychological elements would factor into Grace as a character. We see her strung up, tied up, and sort of reliving nightmares, and it's even in the tagline, you know, reliving these nightmares in the process. Also with the whole there's like a sequence where there's a guy on the floor, and this guy on the floor, he's like bleeding out of his neck or whatever. I would assume there's going to be some recreations as well, because there are folks talking about the mansion coming back and whatnot. Is there going to be Spencer Mansion? I'm like, didn't they blow up Spencer Mansion, right? That's like 100% destroyed, gone, blasted into atoms. But there's still the labs, maybe the underground as well, as we expand into possibilities. Raccoon Forest, we could go back there. And I think what this game should be is harkening back to those old locales, which is what they showed with the RPD. And also they should do that as well with the Spencer Mansion and other places that are relatively important to this case. And what are these new villains, this new threat, what are they doing in these locales as they make these abhorrent creatures? And as I said, recreation is also a thing as well, because we've seen Tall Oaks, and Leon sort of said to himself, hey, this feels like Raccoon City once again. You could do a little bit of that and play on that nostalgia, and I kind of like that stuff, to be honest. I like seeing a recreation of events as to how it will harden the survivors and to try to stop bioterrorism and say, we don't want this stuff to happen again, even if it's 27 years later after Raccoon City. This serves as a memory, a requiem of lost souls. And I love that tie-in. It just aesthetically makes sense in the process, and it fits in with the thematic of the game and what they're going for. Supposedly Leon is going to still play a big role. All right, I do think this is going to be a two-person game. There is no way, because Grace, for all intents and purposes, from what we saw of her personality in the trailer, she still looks green. She still kind of looks like a clumsy rookie that makes a mess and whatnot. And I don't mind new characters in the Resident Evil universe, really. I think Pierce Nevins was one of the best new characters so far, in my opinion, when they introduced them in Resident Evil 6, and then, you know, 7 introduced a new character as well, which is Ethan Winters. And I don't really hate Ethan Winters. It seems like a lot of people do, but the introduction of new characters will highlight new, in particular, story beats within the plot itself. Because if you think about it, yes, if they're gonna harken on psychological horror, then why not have a sort of FBI profiler slash detective come in, and then you can play with that a lot, versus someone like Leon, where clearly he's going to be a lot more older, a lot more refined in a sense, and he probably will save Grace's bacon within this game. I do think that Leon is going to appear, and it makes the most sense because you see the ruination of the RPD zone, right? And that's going to be a pivotal character where he sees this and then he harkens back once again, because he was in the middle of all of that horror. He was in the middle of all of that dread. It's going to be Raccoon City all over again, and you need some rep from Resident Evil 2 to symbolize that notion, and Leon's going to be the one for that, in my personal opinion. I do believe they're going to show him sooner than later. The thing about, like I said, psychological horror, that's great. They obviously will have flashbacks with Alyssa and showing how she dies. I think that is pivotal to show. But the main thing here is the Outbreak connections as well, because if there was ever a time to harken back and say, hey, we're gonna give more Outbreak love, it is time. I believe during the 2020 Capcom data leak, they did indeed have Resident Evil Outbreak listed along with Resident Evil 4, and at the time Resident Evil 9 was called Resident Evil codename Apocalypse, right? And they obviously changed that, but still that was listed in their data leaks. I'm assuming that they could say, hey, In order to get further introduced to these Outbreak characters, not only are we putting the ties in for RE9, but we could also go back and remake Outbreak. And again, Outbreak was listed in that data leak. I don't think they're going to be remasters. They need to be full-on reimaginings. Therefore, it would have better connectivity. You can do the whole reuse assets of RPD and every other location within Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 Remake that you can go to. I mean, they do exist for a reason, and it would be a relatively easier game to create versus just something from scratch, right? And there is the wondering of what has happened to the other characters from Outbreak as well, which I think gradually over time, if you make a sequel to everything involved, not only just Resident Evil 7, 8, and all the other games in the series, along with Outbreak, you need to answer the main question. If you're putting in the daughter of an Outbreak character, what happened to everyone else? Like Yoko, who was the ex-Umbrella scientist, and she would be interesting to make a tape on because she has that history with Umbrella. You know that she worked with them. What is her life like now? Cindy, Kevin, I want to see Kevin Ryman back again. What was his life like after being an RPD officer and witnessing the outbreak? These people are very, very important as well to the Raccoon City fiasco. George, Jim, Mark, David, where are those characters now, and will they be included within the story or referenced? And that's what I want to know, along with everyone else. This point is a point of contention, and I see why people are kind of disappointed by this, but we don't really know what's going on with Jill Valentine right now. So as it was said, there were leakers out there, or proposed leakers, that were trying to say that Jill was going to be a part of this game along with Leon, and I think that would have made sense still, even if they didn't choose Grace Ashcroft, because I mean, Jill, for all intents and purposes, she is a Raccoon City survivor. So is Leon's. Therefore, you got to have those folks within, the game, because again, Resident Evil 3, she was in the thick of it with Nemesis, and then Leon was also there and trying to survive in RPD and everything else. I don't know what they're gonna do, and I feel like it is pivotal to tell their stories. One thing that Geoff Keighley did say is that he saw some press of the game that we didn't see, and he said this is a very ambitious and high stakes and a Resident Evil title with a lot of scale. Therefore, I think there could be the possibility where we might switch between multiple characters. You never know, like you could have your big pivotal characters still there, still involved in the story. Like you can still see Jill or maybe Chris or something like that, because they can't leave the ending of Village off the table, where one of the BSA soldiers tried to murder Chris Redfield, and now the BSA is using biological experiments to their own gain. One thing my friend said, and I'm gonna try to bring this at the forefront, I have invisible notes in the background, so once again, I am trying to siphon through everything, but one thing he said was very interesting, and he said something about, what if the BSA is trying to become Umbrella now? They try to have ex-Umbrella leads take over and infect these people, and this is why a lot of folks are going missing, along with the idea that the connections are still out there. Maybe the connections is slowly and surely corrupting the BSAA, and because of their level of clout and expertise and the money they had over the years, I can see this being a problem to the pre-existing protagonists, and ultimately I want this to lead to a war between the existing factions like the Silver Dagger, I believe, and the DSO and the BSAA, the corrupted version, and trying to go against them, and that'd be so fucking hype. I can't wait to see how all of this goes down, but I do believe that was a very good theory, because why are these people disappearing? Maybe these folks at the BSA or the connections, they need these experiments and they're trying to siphon for their own nefarious deeds. As for the timing of this and when it's going to take place, now there was a 15 or 16 year time gap between Shadows of Rose and I believe it was Ari Village. Yeah. So that gap, I think this game is going to be set in 2026. It's not gonna, it's obviously gonna be a little bit within that gap, but it's not gonna be at the end, I personally believe. So we still don't know what happened to people like Leon or even Grace. All we know for a fact is that Rose and Chris Redfield are still alive after that 15, 16 year time gap. That's it. That's all we know. And I would assume, again, I correlated this to Capcom creating the idea that Wesker sold off his bioweapons to the black market, right? And then when he did that, what that essentially created was creating the idea that Resident Evil is once again a meta series that opens up a lot of isolated incidents in the story. Not only do you have people who can get their hands on BOWs at any time, but now you have a 15-year time gap where a lot of disasters or a lot of situations happened over time and we don't even know who is all alive at the end of the timeline quite yet. Therefore, we're slowly creeping in, and there's going to be some flashbacks and there's going to be some slow creeping in, but I do believe it's going to be based on current year when they release, and that's going to be 2026 because the date of the game coming out is February 2026. Leon's going to be almost 50 years old because he's like 47, right? He's 36 in RE6, so he's going to be like almost 50. 46 years old, and I want to see some mortality slowly creeping in, some sort of line or some sort of story where it's like, yeah, I'm getting older and my skills are getting very, very, very rusty and I need new people to carry the mantle because I can't do this forever. You know, I know some people talked about a finality with the character as well. Is this going to be the final game with Leon Kennedy in there? And that would be crazy because if you want an orthodox scale, then you're going to have to think of the possibility that an older legacy character may not make it in one of these cases. And they toyed around with the idea of killing characters off like Leon and Chris before, so them actually doing it would be once again insane. But you could also gravitate and push new characters or bring characters back that haven't been in the game for a long time, like fucking Billy or Carlos or anyone like that. So at this point, I'm going to bring up the theories that I've seen online. Let's bring up my screen here. So the gameplay segment is over for showing the trailer like 90 billion times. But here we go. This is some stuff I found on the internet that should be somewhat intriguing to reply to. There are some folks that do not believe that the structural integrity of buildings can still exist, or how are they going into Raccoon City and there is fallout everywhere. It should be like Chernobyl, blah 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 blah. So first things first, Raccoon City was hit by a thermobaric bomb. It was not a nuclear explosion like in the fucking whole area is like irradiated and whatnot. It was just a bomb, right? So there is no nuclear fallout still in the area. It was still scientists trying to get samples and whatnot. And I believe in Outbreak, there's even a line that says, well, you know, we're here and other things still might exist out here. I think I'm paraphrasing, right? But it seems to be, and I think it was also at the end of one of the Ari movies, I forget what it was it Degeneration, where they were collecting samples? Tricell was collecting samples out of the Raccoon City crater. It seems like there still might be some possibility of biological life or some remnants there within the remains of Raccoon City. The buildings, you know, the roof being blown off of the RPD or whatever is still structural to some extent, just somewhat almost completely destroyed, right, due to the bomb. And then you see the crater in the outside buildings within. The crater is where the impact hits. The city obviously taking a lot of damage and a lot of high heat or whatever, but there still could be inhabitants within this place. You never know. And again, if these sort of BSA operatives, these people that are turning folks into BOWs in the first place, and scientists also suffering and whatnot, we could also see more creatures within this side of the town, and what's going to happen with the insides of it, what has inhabited this city in the past 27 years, right? You never know, because I hate to use a quote from I hate to use a quote from Jurassic Park, but you know, life finds a way, right? And that could be the case here as well. And I know it ain't regular civilians just walking up here going inside the RPD. They know what went down, right? Because it should be public at this rate from the president himself, or at least, you know, after the president died at RE6, I would imagine that they still went public with this information, or people know to a large extent, right? And they questioned it. Anyway, yeah, buildings are still going to be standing. It's not a bunch of nuclear fallout there. Probably biological stuff is there. Someone said, is Resident Evil 2 OG still canon because the infrastructure of the RPD does not look the same anymore like the original? It's more or less similar to how the remake RPD looked, with everything, with the statue being up at the front and everything, the deaths, it looks just like that. And I think it might be a mixed canon scenario. Like, it's just an infrastructure, so they easily could have reused assets from there and said, hey, here we have a fully modeled RPD, why not use it for this game? It'll make the developments and the level way quicker. Let's just destroy the fuck out of it and see where it goes, right? It's always a mix of old canon and new canon with Resident Evil anyway, and I think it does get tricky. I do think that Capcom is a bit wishy-washy on this logic as well. It's like, oh, well, you know, this is canon, we take that out, we take this out. Even going back to the original RE1, there's no true ending where Barry, Chris, Jill, and Rebecca all get out of the mansion together, right? It's always that one straggler within one of the campaigns. So if you play as Chris, you don't see Barry whatsoever. He even says it, we don't know where Barry is. Same for Jill. If you play as Jill, Rebecca does not become a part of the true ending because you never see Rebecca in Jill's campaign, right? It's just like that. So as long as they take pieces that make sense out of the equation and they make them canon, it really doesn't bother me that much as most people. Now we have another one. Moving on, which scenario of Outbreak do you think is canon? I honestly, it's hard to tell. That's another good question, actually. I think that's a fantastic question. Obviously, I hope it's the one where everyone survives, right? Because that, and possibly taking the daylight serum, because there are folks who are having this theory that, of course, maybe, and there's a line in the trailer that there's a kidnapping guy or whatever, the guy in the hood, saying why Grace is so special, why she's so important for some reason. And you know, just a tangent of this, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Haunting Ground, where people found Fiona so special, right? I know, totally different game, well, one that was also made by Capcom, but I assume this daylight virus and these antibodies, they may have something to do with it, and that's why they want to get their hands on Grace. Maybe not necessarily kill her, but extract it or find some way. And it could be some latent abilities, because as always, when there's latent viruses and antibodies and abilities within people, we saw it with Jill, Sherry, and we also saw it with Rose as well, with the mold, the special form of the mold that gave her powers. It might be the same here, and I want it to be just a little bit more fleshed out and intriguing, because at that point it will feel like retreading a lot. But I guess we'll find out how that goes. There are people making theories Calling it now, Mother Miranda experimented on Spencer with a dormant mold strain while she nursed him back to health when he got lost in her village. That's how he was able to survive Wesker's attack. That would be pretty insane if Spencer was like still alive and going head to head with Brandon Bailey, even though I want to see more of the connections at the forefront because I believe that is still unsolved. Brandon Bailey's not dead, remember? And this other faction of people and their experiments and their viruses and whatnot, you know, they made the Alberto 1. We haven't seen their full side quite yet, but if there is a returning character, maybe there's a possibility where Spencer could have the mold inside of him. Then he gets back up. Then I was like, oh shit, right? And then maybe you can factor in a cleanup crew going to the Spencer estate, and then you find that Spencer's still there and he kills all these people. That's a wild fucking theory. I love it, and I hope it becomes true. Let's see. Is Grace and Rose Winters the same person? No, I think this is just a case of the RE engine having blonde females look very similar in nature together. Yeah, the nose right here, that's giving difference across the board. 100% different characters for sure, and I guess she needed to be blonde. Grace needed to be blonde because, well, her mother, considering who her mother is. I wish her hair looked kind of style like her mom, right? A little like this, where it's a little bit of a dirtier blonde, but I digress. That's just me. But I don't think they're the same character at all. So this still of Lisa Trevor is what people are kind of speculating is the creature that has shackles on screaming at the end of this trailer. If Lisa has survived the laboratory incidents or the Spencer mansion being blown up, right, that would be fucking crazy, right? And didn't they say that Lisa's immortal? She can't be killed? Maybe the explosion didn't kill her. Imagine that Wesker got out and he shot the chandelier on Lisa, right? And obviously the explosion happened, but imagine if that shit did not kill her and you went back and she was crawling around and it was all in first person and it's scary as fuck, right? But she has like no mass of the sort due to the explosion. She's still looking for her mom. Yeah, that's also true. Her mom is like attached to her face and she's really mad about that or whatever. Oh my god, that'd be so fucking creepy and crazy and ridiculous with these theories. I am highlighting Biohazard Dash because it's not the first time. It's like, this is why I love this idea for Requiem, right? It's not the first time that a Resident Evil project was almost green lighted for going back to an abandoned place. Biohazard Dash, in the development of Resident Evil, the team at Planning Room 2 had to cut out a considerable portion of the game to reach a release date, something the developers regretted significantly, whereas the Resident Evil 2 project moved to an urban setting. Dash was to return to what remained of the mansion. The game, pitched by Yoshiki Akamoto, would have reused existing environment assets from Resident Evil but modified to appear damaged. That's fucking insane of an idea. They're kind of bringing that back with the damaged RPD. In the proposed setting, it would have been around the year 2001, by which what remained of the mansion had been taken over by irregular mutants from the surrounding forest, such as the giant spiders and lizards. They could still be in the raccoon forest in Requiem. Just think about that shit, right? Like the zombie dogs, maybe they escaped the explosion or whatever. Like some form of life exists, and we might be seeing it like up close and personal. Oh man, I cannot wait till this game comes out in February. There's one thing that I brought up with Grace Ashcroft. And it's that in the flashback scenario where I think that's when you're in the woods with Albert Lester, the guy with the axe, the weird man with the axe, and he has like a hood on and shit like that. Yes, I played Outbreak File 1 and File 2. It's on my podcast channel. I'm glad that I played it. I could bring all this stuff up into fruition. In that scenario, if you play as Alyssa Ashcroft, she will see certain things from 1993. Like, you go to certain places, you see like an injured civilian, or you'll see two police officers like talk if there's any survivors, and you get these sort of flash forwards, and they're kind of a little bit like premonitions of what occurred in certain places. I'm thinking to myself, maybe Grace has that latent ability from her mom, and you're gonna see that in full display. I talked about this a bit on my Discord server, and it making the protagonist have this foresight and have her be an FBI analyst opens the game up to dark subject matter and disability as well. And you can actually see it when she remembers the murders of the Rimwood Hotel from where her mother was killed. Like, she's almost been there to an extent, so those abilities will probably factor into the psychological horror as well as the gameplay. I like this theory from my friend AK Austin, where he said Alyssa cured herself with the daylight virus, gave birth to Grace soon after, who might have super antibiotics of the T virus, and she might have some great key moments where they want to make a stronger virus and extract that, and that's why they need her to be there, or need her to be alive, or need to lure her to a certain location in order to capture her. Yes, that's a good theory. I like that. I hope that comes true as well. People saying this is Wesker, this burnt, charred man that was choking someone out with a plastic bag, like Manhunt style. No. Okay. I don't think this is Wesker, because Wesker had his head destroyed by two rocket propelled grenades and they blew him up. Now, I don't know how they would bring him back or collect that DNA since he was in the middle of a volcano in the process, but I mean, I don't know. This is RE. This is a series where you could do anything. If they're keeping everything unorthodox, then I don't really have an issue with Wesker coming back, but I would rather see a new villain take this mantle and take his role and become stronger and become more of a threat in general to the main protagonist in a sense. Let's see. But if he comes back, I don't mind that, because Wesker's like my favorite character, so I'm a bit biased. I'm definitely biased there. And the last thing I want to cover here is that with the BSAA having a bad reputation, you could probably put Chris and Jill on the run yet again. Like, he still has Hound Wolf for a little bit, but he's trying to deal with this ordeal of BSAA North America being corrupted, and so does Jill. I do believe that these Raccoon City survivors and Mansion survivors, putting them in the game and having them play a key role in these certain locales would give nice story context and more to the player, reminiscing themselves as well, which is what the game seems to be all about with that sort of desolated RPD. Thoroughly speaking, I cannot wait for this project to come. I cannot wait for the gameplay. I'm going to be making another podcast and everyone's going to be speculating their theories and talking about it as well. And just, I hope you enjoyed this video of me just yammering on about Resident Evil Requiem. I hope it's in, you know, it could be third person, first person, I don't know. There were some shots that look first person. I think it's going to be a first person game, but if it is third person or the ability to switch, that'll hit the needle on the haystack right there, because if you don't like first person, you can go to third. If you don't like third, you can go to first, and it'll still be a scarier game in the process, but it's two camera angles, so I'm not sure how much manpower they're gonna put into it. It depends, but Capcom is releasing 3 big games in 2026: Resident Evil Requiem, Pragmata, and of course Onimusha Way of the Sword. I'm gonna be there for all 3. I can't wait. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video as much as I did, discussing theories, talking about the general things that we saw in the teaser. these weird murders happening everywhere, and how this is probably going to be one of the most craziest Resident Evil sequels that we will see to date. When there's more information, I will let you guys know. I'm Renegade Operative. I'm signing out. Take care of yourselves, be good people, and keep it spooky. Peace.